Hi everyone, welcome on Magic Ovaries. Today I'm sharing with you the interview of Ginny Phang, the founder of iBirth Professionals and 4 Trimesters. She'll tell you about the optimal maternal positioning, which is a mix of positions and movement during labor and childbirth. She'll also talk about the pregnancy routine. They all have a major role in childbirth. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do. You can also find Magic Ovaries on Instagram. Enjoy the interview! Could you tell us what is a hypertonic pelvic floor?
Okay, so generally when people are very strong and most of the time with a dancer's background or an athlete, what would have happened over the years based on their training is they would have a pelvic floor that is way too strong. And sometimes that would get into the way of their ability to actually birth their babies. And then it depends on what kind of sports or background that they actually do. One of the challenges is not just a hypertonic pelvic floor, but also a misaligned pelvis, especially when they have to do like dancing with a dominant leg, right? We all tend to have a dominant leg when it comes to a certain sport. So any sports that requires them to have a dominant leg where one leg is stronger than the other, there's a higher chance of a misaligned pelvis.
And how can this affect childbirth?
Generally, to have a baby go through the pelvis is like putting a key through a keyhole. You might have the right key but if you come home drunk in the middle of the night and it's dark, no matter what you do and you don't jam the key in the right way, this key will not be able to open the door. So in the same way, when women go into labor, part of what the baby has to do is like a key going through a keyhole. The key has to enter and then it has to rotate in a certain way. Now, the key may start out from the right angle, but if the keyhole is damaged, where the keyhole is not balanced, like a pelvis that's misaligned, then even though you have the key that is angled in the correct way, it makes it a lot more difficult for the key to be able to go through. So it's like you coming home, and even though when you left your home, you locked the door, everything was okay. If someone tried to break into the home and they use something to kind of, hack into the door, it actually damages the passageway for the baby to come through. So in the same way, when a baby has to do its natural movements, what we call cardinal movements to go through the pelvis, the key thing that we need to do as part of pregnancy preparation, regardless of a mother's background, physical background, right, is two things. One is to create space within her keyhole, within her pelvis, for this baby to go through. The other is to try to keep the pelvis as aligned as possible so that this is a very smooth transition for the key to go through the keyhole.
And do you have recommendation for daily training or daily life exercise adjustments?
Oh, definitely we do. So we have what we call the optimal maternal positioning alignment protocols, and you can check this out on my website, optimalmaternalpositioning.com, where if you click under pregnancy, it will walk you through all the protocols and why do those exercises. Now, when it comes to the exercises, right, because everyone has a different physical background, have a different physical injuries that they've been exposed to, so on and so forth. Usually people have done certain form of intense training, or maybe they had a fall on the tailbone or certain injuries or any sort. Then I would usually recommend that they also see body workers, whether they see like sports massage therapists, whether they see osteopaths, physiotherapists, chiropractors, etc., people who can work with them and their bodies to help align the pelvis. And alignment or misalignment occurs from a week-to-week basis. So you can do the right things, right? Like work with a therapist and do the exercises every day. But if you don't move properly through the day, and because we spend most of our day moving, how we sit, how we stand, how we get in and out of the car, how we get in and out of the bed, all this will actually affect our alignment. So what we're trying to do when people are pregnant is to ensure that their soft tissues are nice and supple and aligned to help the bones stay in alignment for a smoother birth. So again, depending on the background of the person, if they're still dancing, for example, during pregnancy, right? That is to a certain degree up to them what they are able to do and what they feel like doing that makes them feel good. So we have women who are not necessarily dancers, or you have people who do CrossFit or still run marathons in their third trimester of the pregnancy. Then the key thing is whatever choice of exercise that you choose to do, make sure you balance it up with alignment exercises, stretches, and things that will actually help the soft tissues stay aligned in order to help the keyhole stay aligned for a smoother birth experience.
And you just mentioned that it can change from week to week, so it's never too late.
Oh, it's never too late. Yeah, it's never too late. But the key thing is everyone would have a different background and exposure, right? What their body would have gone through. So sometimes you see people where when they just do the exercises, the alignment exercises, they do really well just with the alignment exercises and they get a lot of good results. And some people can do them all day long and still not get the results. So generally as part of their pregnancy routine, because when you look at birth, right, it's training for performance, whether it's training for marathon or performance and everything, it is similar that way when you're preparing for childbirth. 70 to 80% of the work is actually done before the event themselves. You clock your training hours. So in the same way we tell pregnant women, you need a pregnancy routine. And part of the pregnancy routine is the training hours that you actually put in to contribute to the kind of birth that you are planning to have. And then like on the day of the marathon or event or things, there are certain things you cannot control. You cannot control the kind of audience that's going to be there. Okay. Just as if someone were to take a driving test, you cannot control the weather conditions. You cannot control the kind of drivers that you're going to meet on the road. The only thing you can control is how you choose to respond to the situation. So in the same way, when it comes to preparation for childbirth, you do what you can to clock your hours. But when we say clock your hours, when it comes to giving birth, all the hormones you use for giving birth are the same hormones you use for making love. So it's not purely physical. It's very mental and it's very emotional, right? So from a mental and emotional perspective, it's very important for a woman to feel safe, to train her body to the point where when she gets to the event, she's just going to let go. And when she lets go, she's going to let her body take over and do the work for her. And she just has to work with her body that way. So when we talk to pregnant women about pregnancy training, what I wouldn't call it training, I call it like pregnancy routine, right? This is where the pregnancy routine would consist of mental, emotional, as well as physical preparation for the birth. And everyone would have a different pregnancy routine because it will be based on their lifestyle. If they have a very, very active lifestyle and because it makes them feel good, it's part of what they do, so on and so forth, then they need to balance it up with a lot more exercises that will help their soft tissues stay supple. Because it's not a time where you want to get stronger. It's a time where you want to increase your flexibility and your suppleness, the elasticity of your soft tissues to be able to work with your body during childbirth. So everything is geared towards, on the day of the event, what can we do to help childbirth be a more smooth and easier process?
And are the exercise that you have in your pregnancy routine sort of the same that you do during labor? Is it the same kind of exercise to make space, to soften the pelvic floor, or are they two different things?
They are the same, but they can be used depending on how it's being used. So we have two types of exercises. We have what we call passive exercises, and we have active exercises. Passive exercises are alignment protocols, and alignment protocols are meant to work with the soft tissues of the mother. And the reason for that emphasis is because, say, for example, everybody has the potential to do a split. The difference between one person to the next person in their ability to do a split or not is the suppleness of the soft tissue. But all of us, in terms of anatomy, we should be able to do a split. And the difference between person A to B is whether they're flexible enough, which is a case of the soft tissues. In the same way, when women go into labor, everyone has the potential to have a smooth vaginal delivery. But if their soft tissues are tight, like doing a split, even though they have the potential to do a split, it's very difficult for the bones to move in that extremities to be able to achieve that. So the first thing we need to work with, even before we go into labor positions and everything, is to ensure that the soft tissues are supple, because you need supple soft tissues to be able to have the bones move for the baby to pass through, to create space that way. So the passive exercises are meant to work with soft tissues to get the mother to have the suppleness and the flexibility in order to have pelvic mobility. So these are exercises that we encourage them to do throughout pregnancy, every day if possible, at least once a day. Now, when it comes to labor, so when they do them or have them done for them during pregnancy, most women enjoy it. They'll say things like, oh, I sleep a lot better after doing the exercises. It helps me prevent back pain and all that kind of stuff. But if you were to do the passive exercises during labor because of contractions, it doesn't feel as good. So usually we just tell people to do it in early labor, but you don't have to do it if your body is already nice and aligned and your soft tissues are already nice and supple. You can do it because it makes you feel good, but as the contractions get more and more intense, it won't feel good doing the exercises. However, if we're having a challenge during labor's stalled, labor's not progressing or whatever, then we would encourage them to do the exercises during labor. But we do let them know that it's not going to feel as good as it would have felt during pregnancy, because we have contractions when we're going through that. So that would be the passive exercises to work with pelvic mobility. And then we have the active exercises. And the active exercises are meant for pelvic mobility. So what you will hear when you read books about giving birth, right? You need two things. You need change in position of the mother. So this is called maternal position, whether they choose to labor standing up, sitting, being on all fours, side lying, squatting, so on and so forth. That is pelvic, or what we call pelvic mobility, or otherwise known as maternal positions. But when women are adopting a certain position, they tend to move. So these movements are called pelvic, they enhance pelvic mobility, but these movements are called maternal movements. However, when we read books about childbirth, we tend to mix up maternal movements and maternal position, and we lump them as one. Basically, if you go to a hospital, most of the time the system will say, okay, come on, you can't be lying down during labor. You got to stand up, you got to move around, you got to move your hips and things like that. And that's what they are told. But they're not actually told the full story. So when women go into labor and when they use what we call active exercises, right, we have two focuses. One, to be in an active birth position. An active birth position is any position that will allow the pelvis to move, okay? So if they're going to be sitting, and they're going to be sitting and compressing the sacrum, this will call what we call a restricted pelvis. Generally, as the baby is coming through, we want the pelvis to open this way and we want the pelvis to open this way. As the baby goes deeper in the pelvis, we want the pelvis to open this way and we want the pelvis to open this way, okay? But when people are sitting down or in any position, semi-reclining and sitting on their sacrum, it causes a restricted pelvis where the pelvis is not able to be mobile. So any position that allows the pelvis to be mobile would be an active birth position. So generally, you're just saying any position where you're not sitting or compressing your sacrum would be an active birth position. And that would be standing, sitting, side lying, being on all fours, and squatting when they are pushing the baby out. Then we go into movements. What kind of movements do women usually use during labor? The common term that you will hear is rocking. Okay, but when it comes to rocking, there's different kind of rock. You can rock your pelvis front and back. You can rock your pelvis side to side. You can rock your pelvis in circular, or you can rock your pelvis in a figure 8. And they have different outcomes. So when we do small movements, what happens is if you have a woman moving during labor and she's moving her pelvis side to side. Now, what she's doing is that she's moving the pelvis as a whole. There is no contranutation or nutation of the pelvis, which means that there is no modification to the opening. She's moving the pelvis as a whole. And one of the common mistakes that women tend to make during labor is that they move the pelvis in between contractions. But during contractions, they freeze and they stay in that position, whatever position that they are in. So the key thing is, in between contractions, you should be resting and conserving energy, because that's the only time you get to rest. But when you have a contraction, you should be moving, because you want to use the force of the contraction to try to get the baby into the pelvis. That's why you move during labor, because as the baby, the key is trying to find a way into the keyhole. You're trying to adjust the keyhole to see, is this better? Is this better? Is this better? Okay. So when we move and we do small movements, what we call pelvic transitions, what it does is that it changes the orientation of the pelvis. It doesn't modify the opening. But when we do big movements, we do large movements where we rock our hips from side to side, then contranutation and nutation of the iliac and the sacrum will occur. And this is when we get modification of the pelvis. So when we encourage women to move around during labor, we're encouraging two things. One is change of maternal positions, and be in at any position that does not cause a restricted pelvis. The other thing that we're doing is to get them to use maternal movements to either change the orientation of the pelvis or to modify the opening. And then when it comes to a point where they're not able to rock because they go, oh, I'm just so tired, I just need to lie down, there are positions that they can use, like internal or external rotation of the femur, just turning the thigh in or outwards. This can cause modification of the opening. So it's really about teaching women and educating them about what they can do during labor to create space and to facilitate this baby's rotation through the pelvis. And this is where, like, you know, a lot of times, especially when they have a dancer's background, they expect themselves to be pretty well versed with anatomy. And part of the complaints that they would come about is like, I know my body, you know, I've been working, all I do is body work. How come I had so many challenges during the birth? Because a lot of the information out there does not focus on helping them to be able to navigate through labor and birth, to learn how to work with their body the way they work with their bodies when they're performing or dancing. So in the same way, it's like you're learning a new tool, a new skill to maximize the potential of your body for childbirth.
Can you talk about the position of birthing, actually, you know? Somehow we have this picture in our head of a woman giving birth on her back on a bed. And we actually discussed that this is probably not the optimal position.
So when you look at a person in a supine position, so that's when they're lying on the bed or semi-reclining, and different cultures would have different perceptions of births. So you will find that when you talk to someone with an Asian background, right, and they're in an Asian country, a lot of times when they relate giving birth in the modern days, you will find that they will completely see a woman lying flat on her back and giving birth. And then when you are in a bit of a more westernized society, you don't lie flat on your back, but you're in what we call a semi-reclining position, also supine, which is on the back. Now, the moment we are in a supine position, what's happening is we're compressing or putting weight on the sacrum. And this causes a restricted pelvis. And so then we have restricted pelvic mobility. We can't change the orientation of the pelvis. Neither can we modify the pelvic opening, which causes less space for the baby to go through than more space, okay? The other problem with a supine position is what we call the drive angle. And the drive angle, you can see it goes down, but the baby has to come up. So if this is the vagina and this is the anus, what will happen is in a supine position, this baby has to come down and then has to go up. So the chances of the mother tearing more or needing an episiotomy is increased. But the moment you flip a woman around and she's on all fours or squatting or sitting on a birth stool, now the sacrum is free. Once the sacrum is free, the iliac is also free. So we have more ability to maximize and optimize the pelvis to open up and create space for this baby. Second thing is, if the drive angle of a baby is going down this way in a supine position, then you will find if you flip it the other way around, the drive angle from a U shape will become a C. So there's actually no obstruction. It's no longer going against gravity, but now it's actually working with gravity by moving in this direction. Okay, so that's the benefit of being in a position that does not restrict the pelvis. So most of the time when we say be in a position that does not restrict the pelvis, people would think like standing, sitting, kneeling, and squatting, but they don't think side lying. So if for whatever reasons a woman chooses to have pain relief and she's confined to the bed for whatever reasons, then don't lie on the back, but lie on her side. Because as long as she's lying on her side, she will still be able to obtain pelvic mobility.
So I saw that you had many different projects, the iBirth professionals, the 4 trimesters, and then there's another center for women.
Yes.
On how many projects are you working?
I don't call them projects. They're just doing the same thing, but different focus. So we basically have 2 arms, okay? And they diversify into like a Hindu god with many, many hands. So we have the consumer business where we work with pregnant women. And then we have the professional educational business where we work with birth professionals. So iBirth Professionals is our Australian registered business. My husband's Australian. We're based in Singapore. So it's our Australian registered business where we provide education. So this is doula education, advanced anatomy, like optimal maternal positioning, etc. And then we have the consumer arm, which is 4 trimesters, and that's purely, so iBirth Professionals is an international business with students from all over the world. Whereas 4 trimesters is a Singapore business. I cater mostly to people within Singapore, but now all our antenatal classes and everything is on iBirth Professionals as well. So there's a little focus on consumers too, internationally, but in Singapore, people don't know iBirth Professionals. Most people would come to 4 trimesters because we've been around for 17 years. And so we run 2 things. One is just a center for people to come for antenatal classes if they choose to have birth support, etc. But we also actually have a birth house. We call it birth sanctuary. So people actually come to my home to give birth. And hence, when trying to book a call, that gets a little bit challenging because I can't control when they actually go into labor. And they don't just come to us to give birth, they stay with us postpartum for a few days to empower themselves to know what to do before they actually go home. That way they can cope a lot better with breastfeeding when they get home. So we are actually in the early stages of doing a feasibility study. We will know by first quarter of next year if we're going to be opening a mini hospital and expanding from where we are at. So that's the next project. But at the moment, yeah. It should happen. It's just a matter of finance and sustainability, whether a project like that can sustain itself financially. But the idea is because when we have people come and birth in the home, we only do low-risk pregnancies and women who commit to not having drugs during labor. But the truth is every woman needs that kind of care, the mother-centricness where everything revolves around the mother. So we hope that being able to open a registered hospital, we actually educate the medical community and the public on what women are actually needing these days, rather than go to the hospital, be told what you should be doing, stay on your back, lie, and things like that. So a lot of people have unnecessary cesareans, are not given options, etc. And this is where it's really hoping to have a recognized institution or facility to give the power back to women when it comes to childbirth.
Okay, well, thank you again.
No worries. Thank you for having me and look forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you for watching this video until the end. I'll see you next month. Ciao.